Well, good morning again, and welcome. My name is Rafael Braz, and on behalf of Georgia Tech, we would like to thank you for joining us here today for the Ivan Allen Jr. Prize for Social Courage Symposium. The annual symposium was established to honor alumnus and former Atlanta Mayor Ivan Allen Jr. The symposium is so important to Georgia Tech because it brings us together to celebrate and highlight examples of transformative work that is addressing some of the most difficult issues facing our nation and the world. But beyond celebration, the symposium also allows us a time to reflect and consider the grand challenges that still face our neighbors both near and far, and in here, now and in years to come. Awarded for the first time on March 2011, the Ivan Allen Jr. Prize for Social Courage is made possible by the generous support of the Wilbur and Hilda Glenn Family Foundation, and recognizes those around the world who, by standing up for clear moral principles and in the social arena, have positively affected the public discourse. We thank members of the Allen family and the Ivan Allen Advisory Board for their commitment and joining us today. Mayor Allen was an insightful, courageous, and innovative leader who envisioned a truly transformative path for the city of Atlanta. His leadership, both in business and community engagement, forever changed the city's economic and civic landscape. Transformative change, innovation, commitment, and courage, those are the key issues of this prize, the key descriptors of this prize. These attributes are really and truly the legacy of Ivan Allen Jr., and they are the motivators for Dean Jacqueline Royster and the faculty, staff, and students in the Ivan Allen College of Liberal Arts. I'd like to recognize Dean Royster, who is here today. Dean Royster, can you stand? Thank you, Jackie, Dean Royster, and thank you all to all the faculty for your hard work in putting this together. Ivan Allen Jr.'s work and commitment were truly extraordinary, and this prize that bears his name underscores Georgia Tech's mission to improve the human condition by recognizing those around the world who, like Mayor Allen, have made a positive difference by standing up for moral principle at the risk of their career and livelihoods, and even their life. Before I go forward, I know that there's at least one previous winner of this award, Dr. Foggy. Could you please stand? Am I missing anybody? Previous awardee? Thank you very much for being here, Dr. Foggy. We're going to take a few minutes now to remember the work of Ivan Allen Jr.
When Ivan Allen served as Atlanta's 52nd mayor, he demonstrated transformational and visionary leadership by partnering with Dr. Martin Luther King on key civil rights issues of the day. And Atlanta is radically different from other cities because of his exceptional leadership.
Ivan Allen Jr. was a visionary, a man of action. When he was inaugurated as mayor of Atlanta in 1962, he faced a city in economic malaise and deeply divided by racial segregation. But Allen was ready for the challenge. His 6-point Forward Atlanta plan encompassed urban renewal, new infrastructure including an expressway system and plans for public transportation, the building of a civic auditorium, a Major League sports stadium, and a commitment to keeping open Atlanta schools through racial discord.
The major contribution, I think, of Ivan Allen was that he dreamed of a city of 4 million people. Well, we didn't have a 400,000 folk in the entire region.
Mayor Allen succeeded on all points of his plan during 8 years in office, creating the greatest economic surge in the city's history, bringing in Braves, Hawks, and Falcons, a vibrant new arts and cultural scene, and creating the beginning of a unified New South. As he listened daily to the concerns of African Americans, what began as a businessman's strategy for economic growth grew into a deep moral conviction that the public accommodation for African Americans was the right thing, and his advocacy grew stronger.
It's hard for anyone outside of the South to understand the depth of feeling that existed then, the prejudices that swept our schools, our churches, that justified this discrimination. There were a very few courageous people that broke that shell that we had built around ourselves. One of them was Ivan Allen.
Ivan Allen displayed courage in confronting his adversaries, but he also challenged his peers and was willing to incur their scorn and anger where social justice was at stake.
The challenge to complete the elimination of discrimination from all public accommodation furnishes us with a great opportunity to
In 1963, at the behest of President John F. Kennedy, Mayor Allen testified before Congress on behalf of what became the Civil Rights Act of 1964. He was the only prominent white Southern leader to do so.
There was a time when vast numbers of people hated him intensely because of his stand on integration. So much so that the Allen family had police protection in their home for a good period of time. And these feelings were not limited to the raw fringes of society. They were present at all social levels.
Mayor Allen's partnerships with Martin Luther King Jr. and other African Americans showed that barriers were falling, and a long overdue transformation was close enough to touch.
On issue after issue, he showed sound judgment and a commitment to the future.
He was a leader while he was a student here at Georgia Tech and went on to be a leader in everything he did throughout his career. Now, half a century later, his life is a beacon of light for those of us following in his footsteps. It's our goal here at Georgia Tech to take the legacy of Ivan Allen Jr. and pass it on to the next generation.
The name Ivan Allen was a beacon light for breaking through the darkness, and I'm personally grateful to him.
It's the legacy of Ivan Allen Jr., the man whose values infuse the way we teach and the way we learn.
The character and integrity revealed in acts of social courage are not qualities that can be simply switched on when needed. They have to be built and practiced day by day, week by week, and year by year. To build a world of promise and avoid a world of peril, we're going to have to cooperate with each other. Ivan Allen Jr. showed us the way.
Well, that's certainly quite a life to emulate. But today, we certainly have the opportunity to honor a couple that really and truly have made a difference. Today, we will be honoring President Jimmy Carter and former First Lady Rosalynn Carter. At Georgia Tech, we proudly call President Carter one of our own. And today we celebrate what is now more than half a century of the Carter's service, advocacy, and resolve to promote democracy, protect human rights, and prevent disease around the world. Their partnership is truly inspirational. We welcome members of the Carter family who are here today. We're joined by, I believe, by two of the Carter's grandsons, including Josh Carter, who I believe is here with his wife, Sarah Jane, and former State Senator Jason Carter, who is participating in the first panel this morning. From the Institute's perspective, we must engage and partner with leaders whose experience, courage, and actions are transforming our world by creating and sustaining social change. Today, we honor and celebrate the Carters' exemplary leadership. May their actions serve as beacons of courage to us all. Again, I thank you for being here today. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce the moderator of this morning's first panel, Mr. John Pruitt. A mainstay of Atlanta, Pruitt retired from Channel 2 Action News in 2010 after 47 years on Atlanta's television. Throughout this historic career, Pruitt covered major civil rights stories, Jimmy Carter's gubernatorial and presidential campaigns, the funeral of Dr. Martin Luther King, the inaugurations of Presidents Carter and Clinton, and attacks on the U.S. Marine barracks in Lebanon in 1983, and the World Trade Center on September 11, 2001. He is a 10-time Emmy winner, among other awards, and is a member of the Atlanta Press Club Hall of Fame. Please join me in welcoming Mr. John Pruitt.
Thank you very much. Well, these are not great times for journalists, even retired journalists, but I hope we have a friendly crowd here today. I am extremely fortunate to have been a reporter starting in 1964 and to have actually covered Ivan Allen Jr. I thought the video did a remarkable job of profiling his career, but as a young reporter covering this man, I just want to add my 2 cents worth. It's important to remember that Ivan Allen Jr. came from a background of segregation, and to be elected to public office in the 60s in the South, you almost had to speak in terms of being a segregationist. He dramatically changed when he took office. It was 180 degrees. And this is an award for social service, courage. And I've never seen a public official display the courage that Ivan Allen Jr. did in going to Washington and testifying for the Civil Rights Act of 1964, an act of remarkable political courage, to do the right thing, not the politically expedient thing. While the fire hoses and police dogs were in the streets of Birmingham, Atlanta had a mayor who ushered us into the era that we now all enjoy. But it wasn't just political courage. This man had physical courage. There was a day in the late 60s when there was a riot in the Summerhill community. Crowds were running, breaking windows. The police were in there trying to control the crowd. Ivan Allen went into that crowd with a bullhorn, climbed up on a police car, tried to calm the crowd. Unfortunately, it didn't work. The crowd approached the police car, began rocking it, and Ivan Allen was knocked off of that police car. But the physical courage to put himself in harm's way to protect his city and the people of the city is something that has stayed with me ever since. So, journalists are supposed to be objective. When it comes to Ivan Allen Jr., I am not. This was a great man, and I am privileged to be part of this today. I was also very privileged to have covered our honorees from a long time back. My first connection with the Carters was 1970, a terrific governor's race. It was one of the most exciting, colorful races that I think George has ever had. It was a race that Jimmy Carter won, but I was privileged to have been on the campaign trail almost every day, much of that time with Jimmy Carter and Rosalynn Carter. And then was lucky enough to have this governor run for the White House, and I covered the campaign, got to take some road trips, New Hampshire, Florida, Pennsylvania. Went to the White House several times to cover him as president. But the most remarkable thing, I think, is what's happened since then, the post-presidency, when Jimmy and Rosalynn Carter have launched the Carter Presidential Center and gone around the world curing diseases, monitoring elections, waging peace, as the Carter Center likes to say. That's a pretty good term for it. They're remarkable people, remarkable individuals, and they keep on going, and it's just amazing. So it's a thrill to be able to honor them today and to be a part of that. Now, enough from me. We have 6 people here who are going to be talking about the Carters. and their many contributions to our country and to the world. And they view it all from different perspectives. I'm going to introduce them now. There's 6 panelists. I'll introduce them one at a time, and as I introduce the panel, would you please come up and take your seats. The first panelist is Jason Carter, the Honorable Jason Carter, should I say. Jason is a former state senator, a former candidate for governor. He, of course, is the grandson of Jimmy and Rosalind Carter. He is a on the board of, he's the head of the Board of Trustees, the chairman of the Board of Trustees of the Carter Center, and a partner with the law firm of Bondurant, Mixon, and Elmore. So we'll be talking to Jason about his very personal connection with his grandparents. Our next panelist, Ambassador Mary Ann Peters, who is Chief Executive Officer of the Carter Center. She spent almost 30 years in the Foreign Service, including a tour as ambassador to Bangladesh. She will be talking about the humanitarian initiatives of the Carter Center, including Rosalind Carter's various mental health initiatives. Our next panelist is Dr. Mary Ann Borelli. She is professor of government at Connecticut College. She is an expert on gender and politics. She's written a couple of books, The Politics of President's Wife and The President's Cabinet, Gender Power and Representation. Now, the middle seat's for me, so the next 3 panelists will sit on the end. Jonathan T.M. Reckford is Chief Executive Officer for Habitat for Humanity International. And he could certainly tell us about the global impact of this organization, particularly the Carter Work Project, and the impact of having a president and a first lady who put on a carpenter's apron and pick up a hammer and actually build these homes around the world. Lisa A. Gordon is President and Chief Executive Officer of Atlanta Habitat for Humanity. She, of course, will be talking to us about the local impact of Habitat in the metro area and the Carter's role in that. And finally, a man who certainly needs no introduction, Ambassador Andrew Young. He's played such a key role in so many major moments in our city's life, from the civil rights struggle, 8 years as mayor of Atlanta, to bringing the Olympics to Atlanta. He played a vital role in getting Jimmy Carter elected president. And he's here to do what he does best, to give us perspective on all that will be discussed and to lead us in the right way when we step off and run out of bounds. But hopefully we will not be doing that. So I'm going to move to the center seat, and we're going to ask each of these 6 panelists to give us a brief introductory statement, and that will be followed by questions from me, and hopefully we'll have time for questions from the audience. So Jason, we'll begin with you.
Thank you, John. And my take on this is as perhaps the beginning, perhaps the end, but my grandparents' story begins in Plains, Georgia. And I was just talking to President Clow and others about South Georgia, but one of the things about my grandparents' partnership that I think is important to remember is that they both started in this tiny little town of 600 people. And it still has 600 people, and they still live there. And their experience as a couple, the human connection that they feel, the understanding that when they walk into a tiny little village in Mali that some people might think is the middle of nowhere and has nothing to offer, they see it as 600 people who might go on to change the world. And so this background of Plains, Georgia is so fundamental to them as to, it's almost impossible, I think, to overstate it. This is when they got married almost 71 years ago. They celebrated their 70th anniversary the other year. Now, as you know, my grandmother's experience, and as Ambassador Peters will talk, a 70-year marriage is indicative of there's almost no one who has ever lived who's had a 70-year marriage and didn't have a happy, full, incredible life. And the other prizes, the other awards, the other things that have evidenced in my grandparents' life, I think nothing speaks more to their happiness and faith and excitement with the world than their 70-year marriage. And my grandfather would say that it's a testament to his experience in conflict resolution. and my grandmother would say that it's testament to her expertise in mental health. But the experiences that they've had from that tiny town, they've of course became president of the United States, and the partnership that many people will talk about. The piece of it that I wanted to highlight is that so much of the world, whether it's politics, whether it's peacemaking, whether it's business, it's really about human connection. And even if you're talking about the greatest leaders in the world talking to each other, bringing people together, understanding how it works, it's really a story of human connection. And this, of course, is a famous picture of my grandparents, Ambassador Young, this is at Ebenezer Baptist Church. But those types of human connections that they shared together, the fundamental human connection in their life was the one that they shared together. And that's why this award that's given to the partnership is such a remarkable one. This picture, to me, it looks like it could be any couple in love, But this actually was taken in the Middle East in 1978. And as they were getting ready to truly tackle this conflict of literally biblical proportions, right? The Egyptians and the Israelis fought essentially from the time of Exodus or Genesis until 1978. And the process of addressing that became a process that they really tackled in many ways together as an exercise in human connection. This is the presidential diary of Jimmy Carter from February 4th, 1978. And it just illustrates, I think, the way that you build these human connections that ultimately become the foundations for peace. And so you can't see it very well, but the President and First Lady hosted a luncheon for U.S. and Egyptian officials at Camp David. And the President and the First Lady escorted President and Mrs. Sadat on a walking tour of Camp David. And the relationship that they built together was a remarkable one. Then this says the President and the First Lady, accompanied by President and Mrs. Sadat, watched the movie Star Wars. More just evidence of regular people who were at the same time sort of recognizing their common humanity, but they were in the process of changing the world, as an aside. I bet, and they loved it, by the way. And I'll also point out that my grandfather would probably tell you that his best friend ever was a Muslim, and is referenced in this picture here. And in his workshop, he's got a picture of one other person, and it's Anwar Sadat. The Carter Center's work in observing elections, in bringing democracy, the two of them together and their connection just highlights so much of what the Carter Center's work is, which is the type of human connection that's reflected there. This is administering a treatment of river blindness medicine that prevents one of the leading forms of preventable blindness in the world. And again, they do this together over and over and over again. This is in Ghana, but this looks like a scrapbook of a marriage that's just remarkable to me. And this last picture of them is one this is them in the Sudanese elections in 2011. But to me, this one, I took this one this year at New Year's, and that's my son Thomas on the right and my son Henry on the left, and this is the midnight fireworks at the place where we were staying. And the way that they live their lives and the way that they treat their family and the partnership that they have, again, putting aside all of the incredible things that they've done for the world, is just an incredible example to me and I think to so many others. But this is just a family shot, and the two of them still, first of all, stay up till midnight, and they're 93 years old because they want to see the fireworks. But, the love that they have for each other and for their great-grandchildren who are there in this picture, it just seemed to me to be a remarkable celebration for them. And so from my family to the organizers, and obviously the Ivan Allen has been an important part of my family's life. There's an Ivan Allen pavilion at the Carter Center to show just how deeply that goes. But we just wanted to say thank you for recognizing their partnership. Thank you.
I just had a quick follow-up question. Was there a moment as a young person that you said, I want to be like them, I want to go into public service? Or did they take you aside and encourage you to do that? Was it osmosis? What provoked that interest on your part?
You know, I'm not going to answer your question, but I'm going to answer a different question.
Got to follow up.
Well, no, I mean, I guess there's not really a moment where I said, I'm going to run for office. I mean, I talked to them about it, I asked them about it, and you know, when I asked for their advice, they would often, of course, give it. You know, Jason, I think you should do it, or you know, running for office, whether you win or lose, is one of the greatest experiences that you'll have. And so there was that idea, and of course, just having, I guess to use your word, osmosis, having observed a couple important lessons. Number one, that you can achieve sort of the highest political office without compromising your values, without losing track of who you are, without undermining your marriage, right? I mean, some of those things, when you look out at the world of politics and the history of politicians, it's not a very pleasant one sometimes. And to have an example in my family of someone who did all of that was really important. But the moment where I felt the closest to them in terms of running for office and being in public life is I was running for the state senate. My youngest child was 18 months old, and it's, you know, so we had a 3-year-old and 18-month-old, and you know, it was just really hard on the family. When you're running for an office like state senate, you've got to be at every single neighborhood meeting. You've got to do these things, and it was just grinding, and it was just wearing on me, and me and my wife both were having such a hard time just managing our time and our lives, and feeling like, oh, if I miss that event, that's going to be the 2 votes that I would have had. And I went and I sat with my grandparents, just the 4 of us, and they said, how's it going? I said, you know, I'm really tired. And my grandmother said, oh yeah, we always hated it. And I thought, I'm so glad that you guys also thought it was so hard, because but there's not that many people who've gone through it, and to have them who've been so successful talk about how hard it is to sort of live your life in that human way while you're going through it, it was a perfect moment for me, and it's one that I'll always remember. But okay. Thank you.
Let's turn to Marianne Peters. Ambassador, you work very closely with the Carters, obviously, as the CEO of the Carter Center. Your thoughts and perspectives on this remarkable relationship?
Well, thank you, John. Jason, of course, is in a much better position than I am to speak to the long partnership between President and Mrs. Carter, but I have been at the Carter Center for 2.5 years now, and I've seen nothing but an incredible partnership. And by the way, Jason and I chose some of the same photos, not all of the same ones. And I think that's because the photos illustrate so well the partnership that we're talking about. The Carter Center was founded by President and Mrs. Carter in 1982, and together they've led the center for nearly 35 years. Both of our founders are life members of the Carter Center Board of Trustees, which Jason, by the way, now chairs. And Jason and I have a monthly meeting with both President and Mrs. Carter. So it's really true that they are the founders, and they have, of course, not only shaped the programs of the center, but the values that guide the center as well. Just a couple of words about the Carter Center. I thought perhaps we could talk a little more later about the programs. What I'd like to do right now is talk about the mission principles that guide the center. Now, the Carter Center's motto is waging peace, fighting disease, building hope. We've worked in more than 80 countries, and at any given moment, you'll find the Carter Center actively working in about half that number of countries. Our health programs, again, as I think you know, are focused largely on eliminating or eradicating neglected tropical diseases in Africa and Latin America, and our peace programs focus on democracy, on human rights, and on conflict resolution. But the character of the center, this really incredible institution that I'm privileged to be a part of, is based more on how we do things and why than on what we do. And the how and the why are the legacy of President and Mrs. Carter. On our website, you'll find 5 mission principles. The first is that the center emphasizes action and measurable results. The second is that we actively seek to avoid duplicating the effective efforts of others. And I really don't know of any other organization that is quite as explicit and deliberate about that mission of finding a niche. The third principle is that because we're going to be doing things no one else really wants to do, like seeking to eradicate guinea worm, we're going to be dealing with difficult problems in difficult places. And therefore, and I think this is really a stunning part of the Carter Center's ethos, failure is an acceptable risk. How many organizations, especially those that depend on money from other people, actually say that failure is an acceptable risk? But of course, we all know from our own experience that an occasional failure is the price of the innovation that fuels achievement. The fourth principle, and don't chuckle, is that the Carter Center is nonpartisan. As President Carter said once again this morning, and he says it often, there are 22 voters in the Carter Center extended family. As far as he knows, they all vote Democratic, and he and Mrs. Carter, of course, certainly do. But our programs are based on values: compassion, respect for human dignity, belief in democracy, that President and Mrs. Carter model, and that I believe, and I know they believe, are shared by the vast majority of Americans across our political spectrum. And the final principle, the one that really I think sets the Carter Center apart, is, and I'll read this one, the center believes that people can improve their own lives when provided with the necessary skills, knowledge, and access to resources. And I've heard both President and Mrs. Carter say time and again that people in these villages that, as Jason said, remind them of plains, those people are just as intelligent as they are. Their family values are just as strong as theirs. Their hopes for their children are just as shining as theirs. And this essential respect is something that you just can't counterfeit. It's about the core value of human dignity, and I think it's the most important value that we have motivating the Carter Center. I'll just say one thing at this point about our programs, and that is to mention Mrs. Carter's special work. One of my colleagues at the center, Phil Wise, whom some of you may know, likes to say that the Carters are equal partners in everything except the mental health program, which Mrs. Carter leads on her own, and according to Phil, won't let President Carter have much to do with. And it's certainly true that Mrs. Carter has unique expertise on mental health issues, which have been her focus since 1970. And one of the slides that's been scrolling shows Mrs. Carter testifying in 2007 before a House subcommittee in favor of parity. That is the requirement that we now enjoy for insurance companies to pay for treatment for mental illnesses on a par with what they cover for physical illnesses. And of course, President Carter himself has deeper expertise in, say, conflict resolution than Mrs. Carter does, although again, she's been part of those efforts since Camp David and continuing through the Carter Center's mediation efforts. And from what I have seen, partnership for them means acting together when that makes sense and taking complementary roles when that achieves a better outcome. So I think I'll end there and hope that we can talk a little more about the Carter Center's programs embodying these values as the discussion proceeds.
Okay, I'm sure we're going to have some questions for you, and we'll get into Q&A. Very good. Well, there's been a lot of talk about the role of First Ladies in the past 4 weeks, and Dr. Marianne Borelli is an expert in that. She is, as I told you earlier, has written 2 books on First Ladies and gender in presidential cabinets. So would you say that the Jimmy Rosalind Carter union in the White House is the ideal to be achieved? I mean, did it set the tone that you think other First Ladies and Chief Executives should follow?
I think one of the most...
Am I leading you too much here?
No. But my 5 minutes. Let me answer that question as I go along.
Okay.
Thank you. So, there we go. This is my chance to kind of give you a little bit about Rosalynn Carter, and it's just such a pleasure to be here. So I'll start by reminding you of what she brought to the White House, especially it's not advancing. There we go. So she entered the White House with the experience of being a woman of the South whose family always had women that worked. She was a mother and a grandmother and very much aware of the responsibilities associated with those roles. She had campaigned actively in her husband's campaigns for the state Senate, for the governor's office, and most definitely for the presidency. And while in the governor's office, Carter had appointed Mrs. Carter. I'm going to go with Carter and Mrs. Carter. Carter had appointed Mrs. Carter to the Governor's Commission for Mental Health Reform. So when they entered the White House, incidentally, they were the first since Thomas Jefferson to walk the parade route, which was an extraordinary act in and of itself. She entered with expertise in campaigning and policy making, as well as a rich set of personal and familial networks. And that was evident in the media coverage, which gradually changed across her time there, from the first new First Lady cover through her mental health work and into her campaigning in the 1980 re-election campaign. So what did she do in the White House? This goes to John's question. First, she managed traditions in a beautiful and fluid way in the midst of the Equal Rights Amendment and feminist revolutions. So the traditional feminine perspectives on the First Lady, including the holiday parties, 35 state dinners in 4 years. And then she moved into office. And the office of the First Lady was renovated, reformed, revolutionized by Rosalynn Carter with increased specialization and departmentalization. She's shown here with Madeleine McBean and then with Mary Finch Hoyt, her press secretary. Oops, hold on. There we go. As a policy entrepreneur, one of the most remarkable elements of her work was her independent travel. She began with a trip to Latin America in 1977, sent as the president's representative to meet with heads of state and heads of government to discuss issues as diverse as weapons sales and disarmament and trade barriers and trade alliances. The diversity of her international travel can be illustrated by going straight to 1979, 2 years later, when she led an effort to increase international awareness of the extraordinary circumstance of Cambodian refugees in Thailand. Through her work, her travel, she brought international attention and fundraising efforts to respond to this humanitarian crisis. And having read the papers when she returned, I can tell you that this was extremely difficult for her staff. Today, we would call her work centered on the politics of identity, as she reached out to work very extensively for those who are senior citizens and for those who are women. You can see her here with Lady Bird Johnson, Betty Ford, and Representative Bella Abzug lifting the torch of liberty in her work for the ERA. But as others have said, her work in mental health was really her signature. In 4 years, she took the cause of mental health reform from an idea to a commission, she's shown here at hearings in Chicago, to a completed report, there we go, to legislation that was actively and actually funded quite extensively for major reforms at the national level in our mental health care. In 1980, as the Iran hostage crisis wore on, she became the president's point person in the re-election campaign, traveling to over 166 cities and becoming among the first of the First Ladies to be a public fundraiser for the presidential campaign. So when that campaign was lost, it must have seemed to Rosalynn Carter that a lot of political opportunities were lost. Certainly the mental health reforms and programs that she had initiated were immediately defunded in the Reagan administration. To understand the post-presidency is to understand the work of a woman who has once again revolutionized undertakings. She remains a formidable policy entrepreneur with 5 books to her credit, 3 centered on caregiving and mental health care. She is the head of the Rosalynn Carter Institute, a major clearinghouse for ideas and understandings relating to caregiving and to mental health. And of course, she's very active in Habitat for Humanity, as you will be seeing. But I'd like to draw your attention to her tool belt. This is one of my favorite pictures, where you can just barely see. Do you see that RSC in there? Mm-hmm. We all know, I speak as a member of the public, Rosalynn Carter as Rosalynn Carter. But every memo in the White House was initialed RSC. She always remembered, as Jason has said, where she came from. She always took the Smith with her. And I've never forgotten all those memos initialed RSC. So when I saw this tool belt, she's still doing it. So the partnership continues, and it's a very vibrant and dynamic one, as you have heard. And it's something that says a great deal about us, that we're becoming aware of what an extraordinary thing that is. Her work was often in the background, with the exception of mental health. And that sometimes does not earn the respect that it merits. But in this play, authored by Lawrence Wright, her interactions with Jimmy Carter, Anwar Sadat, Menachem Begin are accurately portrayed as facilitating the exchange amongst the individuals who would lead to major changes, as Jason has said, in the Middle East peace agreements. So I leave you with a quote that is so very typical of this woman's profundity, depth, and succinctness. Thank you.
Thank you. Would it be fair to ask you for a historical comparison, Rosalynn Carter to other First Ladies? Any one come to mind?
I think the thing that's remarkable is people often turn to Eleanor Roosevelt. But Eleanor Roosevelt had to excuse every trip she took. My husband says it's all right. I'm just the eyes and ears of the president. And the difference for Rosalynn Carter and Jimmy Carter is that President Carter said that he sent her to be more than his eyes and ears. She was there to conduct conversations, to build relationships, and to actively participate in policy making. President Johnson sent Lady Bird Johnson out to sell the successes of his administration and to advocate strongly for controversial programs, including the Civil Rights Act and urban renewal, but he masked those. So she had a whistle-stop tour through the South, or she had beautification rather than urban development. I think the difference with Rosalynn and Jimmy Carter is that there was a forthrightness with the public, that this woman, his wife, would be more than goodwill tours, more than someone whose activism and whose mindfulness had to be excused. Her creativity was advertised by the president, and her advocacy was respected by the president. So it's a major change, and one that we're gradually seeing continue with fits and starts.
There was a closeness and love there, too, that permeated everything they did, which I think made a huge difference. All right, we saw the photo of Rosalynn and Jimmy in the tool belt, and now we're going to have Jonathan Reckford tell us about the impact of the Carters on Habitat for Humanity. I mean, you should have that on all your fundraising posters. We probably already do.
We have it on a lot, John. Thank you. It's an honor to be here and to talk about two of my favorite subjects that are really synonymous with Habitat for Humanity and the Carters. And two of the things, if you ask most people, what do you know about Habitat for Humanity, they would say, President Carter started it, and they give away houses. So we're actually best known for two things that aren't true. But it is no question, I think, though President and Mrs. Carter did not start Habitat, they unquestionably put it on the map. And I'm not sure anybody would have heard of it, or far fewer people would have ever heard of it, had they not gotten involved in 1984. And in context, Habitat started in 1976. In those first 8 years, was able to help about 1,000 families globally in a handful of places. And in 1984, it's hard to remember how radical it was that an ex-president and former First Lady would get on a bus and drive from Plains, Georgia to New York City and spend a week sleeping in a church basement and renovating a tenement house on the Lower East Side. And that drew unbelievable amounts of press. And to put that in context, in their direct work now, in the 33 times they have spent a week somewhere in the world building homes with families, they have directly worked with 100,000 volunteers in 14 countries and built, renovated, and repaired nearly 4,000 homes. But that really doesn't begin to touch the impact that they've had, because Habitat, in the period since they've got involved, has now helped 10 million people have new or improved housing. And you can see the inflection point from their engagement. Also, I think personally, the thing I'm so struck is not just what they've done, but how they've done it and who they are. One of my favorite stories is actually came from one of my friends on their Secret Service detail, who have been along on so many of these journeys, and they said one time they were watching, which is always awkward if you're in the Secret Service, because they have to watch the Carters work hard, and they can't help because they have to keep them safe. So President Carter was a deacon at the local church in Plains, so he was out mowing the lawn. And so think about that. But it was mowing lawn, and a big car drove up into the church driveway, and a person rolled down the window and said, "Hey, isn't this the church where Jimmy Carter teaches Sunday school?" He looked up, had a cap on. "Yep." Turned to his wife, "Hey, this is the church where Jimmy Carter teaches Sunday school." And they rolled up the window and drove off. And it just didn't occur to them that you'd see a former president out in front mowing the lawn. And it is, and we see that so often. And it's really both of them. And in terms of inspiring people about the idea of servant leadership, they are the only two that have been part of all 33 Carter work projects. Last summer, we built in Memphis, Tennessee. There's a longer story about how we ended up in Memphis in the summer, but the second day, it was 110 heat index. It was really hot. And I was laughing because President Carter, the first time he turned to me, said, "You know, this isn't quite as much fun as back when I was 80. And I thought, you know, to aspire to such a statement is a truly remarkable thing. But they have lent their equity in so many ways. And I think President Carter would be the first to say this is a vehicle for putting his faith into action. And in a time in our country and world where we have so much division, I have seen literally comments from people around the world of saying, you know, I don't agree with their theology, but I'm so glad they're here. They make our community better, which is such, I think, the way we would like to see, people of faith would like to see their faith acknowledged and expressed. And they have brought hope to so many. My first Carter project was in Lonavala, India, and it was chosen because President Carter's mother had served in the Peace Corps there. And we were, I think we had people from 21 different countries working on two small, we were working on a duplex, so there were actually two families with a shared common wall, and actually the women were the homeowners, but these are their husbands. And at the end of the week, we gathered around, and dedication ceremonies are always the most stirring part of the week, and people were just sharing their experiences of the week. And here, a gentleman named Subhash, on the right, put his arm around his new neighbor Aziz, and this process of their sweat equity and working together over the months prior to and then during that week. And he said, you know, we're from different castes. One, in India, as you know, a big social barrier, and we're for different faiths. One Hindu, one Muslim. But now we're brothers, and this process of coming together, as Desmond Tutu said, is so much more than just a physical place to live. And he said, as the physical walls go up, the invisible walls that separate us as people come tumbling down, and hope is built in the community. And I think President and Mrs. Carter have been just exemplars and ambassadors of that hope in so many contexts around the world. Another piece to me is my definition of integrity is that wholeness in all circumstances. And I have been with them, with some of the most powerful people in the world and some of the least powerful and least well-off in material terms people in the world, and they are always the same in all circumstances, which I think is a remarkable thing. It is the first time I met them, I was really nervous. President Carter was the official chair of my selection to join Habitat, so the last step was to drive down to Plains and meet with them. And I was excited about it, but a little bit nervous as well. That long drive from the Atlanta airport, and came in, and they just could not, for all of you who have met them, they could not have been more gracious. And they sat together holding hands, and we had this lovely conversation. And I think it is such an image that in so many places you just see them quietly holding hands and walking together. And Mrs. Carter has been such a remarkable example of strength and determination with civility, which is a combination we also need more of in our world. And she has spoken up so strongly, but has often said, and gets very emotional when she talks about the impact of the families she has gotten to know in all these various contexts and locations, and always says that we get so much more out of the chance to serve than anything we are able to give. And I think their collective, their combined example of service has defined, certainly redefined the post-presidency, but for really now generations defined what it is to serve and have impact in your community. So it is so appropriate, I think, that they are the recipients of the Ivan Allen Prize for Social Courage. I can't think of anyone more deserving, and it has certainly been one of the great honors and privileges of my life to work alongside them and to call them friends. Thank you.
I was disappointed last year when the Nepal trip was canceled, because we were going to actually go to Nepal and cover that, and I was looking forward to it, but because of the circumstances in country, it was canceled. So let me know when you reschedule Nepal.
We would love to. We were all crushed. It was the right decision, but it was so disappointing.
So the Carters are amazing, but to see them actually working at altitude and doing this thing with a tool belt, I mean, that's extraordinary. Lisa Gordon is the CEO of the Atlanta Habitat for Humanity, and you can give us a closer look at the local picture. What has this meant for Atlanta and the Carter involvement?
Good morning, everyone. It's just an honor to be here talking about the work of President and Mrs. Carter and in the local community here in Atlanta. It's been significant. Our affiliate was starting in 1983 and was doing 5 to 10 homes a year. And in 1991, President and Mrs. Carter had the idea of, can we do something to revitalize and transform Atlanta? And they came up with the Atlanta Project, and it was a project that was lasting 5 years, but the impact of it was about 10 years. And so I'll just share a few pictures. This first picture shows them actively working on the homes with us in the community. And on the next slide, you just see a dedication. So not only were President and Mrs. Carter active throughout this project, in 1996 is when it was coming into the Olympics, where we built over 100 homes. And this is actually a picture, and if you see on the left with Arthur Blank, where they were dedicating the 100th home that was part of that 2-year challenge. And I think the power of partnerships was their personal partnership with each other, but with the community, but they galvanized civic organizations, faith organizations, corporate sponsors, and the community in a way that really leveraged the work of Habitat that had not been done before. So I really feel like the Atlanta Habitat affiliate is very fortunate to have had them invest time, money, their influence to build that partnership. On the next picture, you see during this project, they even had gotten Michael Jackson to come and do a concert here in Atlanta, which at that time was just during the time when he was the king of pop in the 90s. So you know how phenomenal that would be to have a fundraising event where it's a concert, and that kind of leverage, we just don't have that. And seeing those partners come together. In the next image, this was just a build, and I think that what all the speakers have talked about is the human connection of partnership. When you actually connect with someone, when someone passes you a nail, or you get a hammer, or you actually hit your thumb because you're not that good, you're on the build site, you're on the roof, you're caulking, you're doing all these activities that seem very simple, but they're connecting in that at the end of the day, you see how it transforms a family and how it transforms a community. And I think that's the power of partnership. In our next image, I just wanted to bring this because I'm a numbers geek. So I wanted to show this impact because when you talk about catalytic change, in 1991, we were just under 20 homes. And in that 5-year period, we went from 20 to 50. And in the 2-year period of 95, 96, and 97 is when we built the 100 homes for the Olympics. And then after that, you see that number stays up there at about 50 or 60 homes. And so it goes from an investment of about $660,000 to $3.7 million in a 3-year period. But if you see those first 3 years, it almost doubles every year. And that kind of catalytic change was not only the resources that were invested, it was the people and the partnerships. And in the next slide, you'll see some pictures. You see President Clinton, you see Vice President Al Gore, you see President Carter. President Carter and Mrs. Carter were instrumental in continuing to bring the partnership, the awareness, and the investment to the local community, which is just phenomenal. In the next image, one of the things I wanted to bring up is that our house sponsorships and our volunteers, so in '91 we had about 50 people giving us sponsorships, and by the end of that 10-year period it had doubled, and today our sponsorships is close to 250 sponsors. Many of those sponsors continued from the time of this Atlanta project. Also, the volunteers during that volume in 1991 was about 5,300. It doubled to about 10,000, and at the height of building for the Olympics was 17,000 people. Imagine that. It had never picked up a hammer, but are now volunteers, and we have maintained that. We have about 13,000 volunteers that volunteer with us each and every year. And so in this slide, I guess you can see it better. These are some of the partners that have built with us since the Atlanta project, and they're 25-year partners: churches, corporations, and continued investment. So really, that catalytic change is something that we continue to benefit from. And in the next slide, I just wanted to share that that legacy of partnership continues in our own mission today. So we just updated our mission last year, and one of the things we wanted to focus back on is that transformation of communities, catalyzing neighborhood revitalization, working with other partners, and creating long-term relationships with the family and the community. And I feel like that Atlanta project was the beginning of putting all those components together. In our last slide, this just tells you what we're doing today. We're still making a huge impact in Atlanta, about $6 million in economic impact each year. So in last year, we built 50 homes. We served families through critical repair. And we have continued to get sponsors and individual sponsors. And one of the things we're doing that's new, which is our restores, which is where we divert goods to a store and resell them. Our restore had $1.5 million of sales, but I still, again, it's all of those connecting points with people who share our mission, our love for revitalization, and that was catalyzed by President and Mrs. Carter. And the last slide is just, we awarded them the Golden Hammer. That's our highest award, but it should be like a platinum hammer for all the work they've done and for the legacy that they have allowed us to be part of. And so we're so thankful for all that they do, and that work still is giving us benefits today.
In terms of celebrity involvement, I mean, the role of the Carters being there, you've attracted so many other well-known people. It's sort of a roller coaster effect, isn't it? Yeah, outstanding. Well, at the very end of our row, Ambassador Young has waited patiently. And now it's his turn, and he may not answer my question because he tends to say whatever he wants to say, which is, but you've inspired a lot of people in your life. Have the Carters inspired you?
Well, they not only inspired me, they drafted me. We talk about President Carter's life after politics, but it was really he was an exceptional politician. And coming out of Georgia, he was always on the progressive side of every issue. And it was very shocking when he became president and the Congressional Black Caucus didn't want to meet with him. And once they sat in a room with him, they all ended up supporting him for president. He was running as a peanut farmer. And that was necessary because we were just coming out of the war in Vietnam. But probably his work in disarmament, in climate change, in peace and reconciliation. He and Rosalynn together, I think she went to President Lopez Portillo's inauguration before his inauguration and came back from Mexico talking about the need for us to get involved with Panama and suggesting that I be sent down to Latin America to confirm what she'd come back with. But the president had already asked me to do something with Africa. And what he did, I think, was probably I don't know whether he did this with everybody, but he said to me, go to Africa and ask African leaders what they expect of this administration. And I think that's unique. And because we asked, we found out that they wanted us to do exactly what we wanted to do. And I think that happened also, not only in Panama but and Africa, but he got the word from Sadat and Begin separately that there would not be peace in the Middle East unless there could be peace between Egypt and Israel. And the security and stability that has remained in the Middle East for the last 50 years is directly related to his personal negotiations between Sadat and Begin. It's remarkable that during his time as president, not a single American was killed in battle, and not a single American killed anybody. And I think all of the work that you all are talking about, and you get on my nerves, talking about what a great ex-president he was. He was the best damn president we've had in my lifetime. And he left with the budget was a $60 billion deficit when he came in, and it was $60 billion when he went out. So he created no deficit. He was financially stable. He was visionary in terms of foreign policy. And Rosalynn was at the heart of all of that. She walked into the cabinet meetings quietly after they sat down, and she sat quietly in the back and observed. And I know she commented on everything and everybody said, because it was maybe one of the most significant co-presidencies. She never said hardly anything publicly, but he wouldn't be married to her happily for 70 years if he didn't listen to her. That's it.
I'm curious, Andy, when you first encountered Jimmy Carter, because my guess is you probably were not a Carter supporter in the 1970 governor's race. So at some point, you met him and he won you over. Is that correct?
Well,
would that be correct?
Not quite.
In the Democratic primary in the 1970s.
No, but it was in '66. I met him in Pascal's, and he said, I said, the only thing I know about America, Sumter County, is Sheriff Chappell. He said, oh yeah, he's my friend. Well, Dr. King said that Sheriff Chappell was the meanest man in the world back in '61 when we were in Albany. And so that was a shock. How am I going to work with this guy? But shortly after that, I met Chip and Miss Lillian. And both of them were amongst the most progressive Southerners I'd ever met. And I said, you know, this guy's mama's all right and his son's all right. He's got to be okay too. So it always has been a family affair with the Carters. In fact, when they were picking on Billy, I made it a point to go down and meet him. And he and I sat there talking about the books that he had read and things that we were trying to figure out. And the caricature of the family and the presidency is a great disservice, not only to the Carters, but to the nation. And I would say that he probably knew more about nuclear war than all of our presidents put together. I mean, Admiral Rickover selected him from over 500 engineers, graduates of the Naval Academy, to be his deputy in developing a nuclear navy. And I think one of the reasons why he was so determined to maintain peace, he knew better the horrors of war and had participated in helping to develop that defense capability. But it was probably the reason why he was willing to lose an election rather than bother with invading Iran. And interestingly enough, I saw the guy, Bannon, in the White House press conference yesterday, and he was holding under his arm a very interesting book called Going to Tehran, written by two Foreign Service and CIA couple. That is probably the most progressive thing I've heard about Iran since President Carter was president. So I only say that in the midst of all of the horrors and disasters, I think he taught us, or they taught us, that you had to look for the kernel of hope. And I saw that last night. And that's what I want to remember from the press conference of the President.
Thank you for giving me that to hang on to. But your mention of Miss Lillian, I think, is significant, because she was a remarkable woman and a very progressive and enlightened woman. Chip, did you get to know her? I mean,
I knew. We called her Grandmama, and you know, one of the amazing things, just on a personal level for me, all four of my great grandmothers went to college of some kind. So if you think about how generations go, I'm probably the oldest person for whom that's going to be true, like one of the first ever. And my grandmother's, the Smith family, Allie Smith, we called her Mother Allie, she had gone and gotten an advanced degree. She had a job throughout my grandmother's life at the post office in Plains. But my grandmother, my great-grandmother, Miss Lillian, I think that her experiences really infected my whole family. And at the time, that must have been that Andy met her, she had just come back from the Peace Corps. And, you know, she turned 70 in the Peace Corps, which means it's not too late for anybody here. But I think that her experience did a couple things. Number one, you know, go to India as a little old lady, you know, from South Georgia, really taught them again that this community or any community can send people anywhere and make a difference. And it really binds people up in this sort of fabric of humanity in a real way. But the other thing that I think it did is that when he got out of the White House in his 50s, she was standing there saying, I turned 70 in the Peace Corps. You know, what are you going to do? And you know, I think she would be proud at this point. But if you mind, one last Miss Lillian story about journalists as well. So she had more than one child, right? She had 4 children. But one of them was running for president and was going around telling everybody that he would never tell a lie. So the New York Times comes down. The well-respected New York Times, as we call it in my family.
As opposed to dishonest media, fake news.
Fake news. The New York Times comes down and to interview her at this little house out, dirt road in Plains, and she comes to the door as a gracious Southern woman and says, "Oh, it's so nice to see you. Come in. Would you like anything to eat? Sit down." They have this interview. Finally, the guy gets to the point, the reporter, and says, your son is out there telling everybody he'll never tell a lie. Did he ever tell? Do you remember him? Do you mean to have us believe that he never told a lie growing up? And she said, well, I'm sure he told a white lie. And of course, as a good journalist would do, he said, well, what's a white lie? And she said, well, do you remember when you came to the door and I said it was nice to see you?
So, Ambassador Peters, you're relatively new to Atlanta.
I am.
You plunked down here in the Carter Center, and you're hearing some history today. You may know some of this, but how does all this meld with you being here in Atlanta, the cradle of the civil rights movement? I mean, talk about the significance of the Carter Center being in this city.
Well, I did, in fact, move to Atlanta to take this job from Newport, Rhode Island, and I will confess that one of the things that surprised me was the vibrant and unique character of Atlanta. And so it's been a privilege to learn about Ivan Allen, and of course I knew about Ambassador Young as a former diplomat myself, but to learn about the history of the city and how, in a way, 2 roads diverged, and well, all right, Alabama took one road and Georgia took another. Atlanta took one road. So that's been a real privilege to understand just the kind of place where the Carter Center, lives and works, where we live and work. But again, we couldn't be part of a community that didn't represent those values because, our job is to take those values and turn them into ways to alleviate suffering, ways to wage peace. So I actually think that it would be very difficult for the Carter Center to be in the Atlanta that had taken the other road.
And the Center of Global Health that's here is just incredible.
Exactly. Yeah. Very good point. As Jason points out, we have not only the CDC, but we have the Task Force for Global Health. We have many organizations that are coming together in a group. I'll give a little plug to the Georgia Global Health Alliance, which is pulling organizations together that work on global health. And there are a number at Emory as well. I think everyone here is aware of the impact of Atlanta in various ways on global health. So thank you, Jason. That's another way in which it's a perfect petri dish for us.
In Copenhagen, where the Carter Center is, I don't know if this is true or not. I never really pinned it down, but allegedly is the spot, or one of the spots, where General Sherman watched the burning of Atlanta. Is that true, Jason?
You go ahead. No, you go ahead, Jason. You go ahead.
I want sources on this.
It is. I can get you the sources. They're Georgia Tech sources, in fact. But it was the place, sort of the the easternmost part of the current parking lot was the place where the Union Army's headquarters was. And so it was where a variety of different things happened, but there's some controversy among the historians about whether Sherman actually watched Atlanta burn. But if he did, that's where the place where it would have been.
We like the story. I mean, print the legend, not the story.
That is the spot.
I think it's appropriate now to open it up maybe for questions from the audience, because we've got a lot of stuff to talk about here. So please, if you have questions for any particular panelist or a group of panelists. This is so unlike the White House press conference yesterday. Yes. We have a mic runner, too.
I've had the pleasure of knowing the Carters for about 27, 28 years, lost track. But Jody Powell told me one time, as the follow-up on how Mrs. Carter was always in the cabinet room, that she was the sharpest person in the room besides the president. And she would always go up afterwards and so forth. And one of the things I've observed over the years, which, at least anyway, it's my observation, is she was always so observant, watching what was going on in the room and different situations. And she would go in and intervene, just quietly and casually to correct things or to do this. And then a couple of times she'd say, when Jimmy misstepped, he'd say, well, what President Carter meant to say was, and so she would correct him, very diplomatically. So, the woman behind the man, that it was a good team, a good partnership.
Well, this is an interesting question for you in terms of the influence of a First Lady on actual policy, pillow talk, as it were. How does Rosalynn Carter stack up in that regard?
I think that one of the most remarkable things about the Carters is that they were very forthright about it. And so when you read the oral histories, it's just wonderful, because Pat Caddell, if he had bad news, was very forthright. He would come and give it to Mrs. Carter, and Mrs. Carter would give it to Mr. Carter. And the reason for that was because it's not only is it hard to give a president bad news, but presidents are optimists. They have to be. They're running against odds every time they turn around, right? So to have somebody that can deliver bad news and not be dismissed and taken seriously, it's a very big deal. So I think that what you're looking at time and again with First Ladies is that ability to quietly deliver bad news in a way that doesn't make it palatable. It's time to be a grown-up, but instead requires responsibility. And Rosalynn Carter did that brilliantly well and was known for doing it throughout the White House. So that also meant that she was respected for it. It's very hard to be respected when you could be perceived as a barrier, right? And instead she was viewed as an honest broker. And in the work that I've done in the White House, to be viewed as an honest broker is perhaps the highest compliment that can be paid to anyone.
All right. Any other questions?
Can
Yes,
I just say
please.
about that and ask? It seemed to me that the difference between their presidency and marriage and others is that they never spoke as competitors or rivals. They spoke as one. And her influence was through him and not parallel to him.
I think that's very true. And I think the other thing that was going on at this time, of course, you have the Equal Rights Amendment. So the thing that Rosalynn Carter is negotiating is that there's no accepted single standard for how women should conduct themselves as women, as professionals, as wives. Instead, there's huge culture wars being waged over that. And so to watch her negotiations of that with a rare grace, so that she incurred considerable criticism from all sides, but equal criticism from all sides. And that was, I think, in some ways, her ability was gracefulness under criticism. I would agree with you. Yes, Ambassador.
There used to be these steel magnolia stories.
Yes.
And part of that Southern grace. And lest we forget, when the Carters came to Washington, they were not welcomed with open arms. They were outlanders, and there was some blame to be passed out on both sides there. But would you say that Rosalynn Carter was a moderating influence? And I didn't want to interrupt your train of thought. But
I'll go after you.
Go ahead first. I was just going to, when you're done, I was just going to mention that I know that my grandmother sent a note to the current First Lady just to give some advice about some things. I was just going to mention it, but unless you want to hear that now.
Please, go ahead. Please, tell us more.
Well, no, I mean, it was just exactly to Dr. Borelli's point, and I think this is something that you confront in law firms, in colleges, at every level of our communities now, especially I'm 41 years old, my wife confronts this, we all do, there is no accepted way that women are supposed to behave. There's just not. And one of the things that, there's cultural wars, to your point about all the time, and my grandmother sat down, and in many ways, maybe she and Melania don't have a lot in common, but in other ways, she just wrote this very personal note to her and told us about it. And what she said was, you're never going to be able to do it right. So do what you want. You're going to be criticized no matter how you act. So you should be true to yourself and plug in the way that you want to. And she said that was the same advice that Lady Bird Johnson had given to her, which was, there is no good way because you're going to get criticized no matter what. So be yourself and conduct yourself in the way that you would. I just thought that was a pretty fascinating sort of lineage there. But in any event, I didn't mean to jump on there.
No, I think the other thing that it goes to is that she's also telling the new First Lady to do something. So this is a woman who's active, right? No, I mean, think about it. Bess Truman said the best thing that she could do was sit silently and have her hat on straight. And instead, in private, you may not know this, but Bess Truman is responsible for much of the early cancer research funding. That was her voice in the president's ear. So in terms of thinking about Rosalynn Carter and this mediation, it's important to remember that the Carters were outsiders after a long line of insiders. So here, it's like, who are you? I mean, the Jimmy Who campaign continued after the election. And I think that Rosalynn Carter encountered a lot of that in her first ladyship, and that was part of her negotiations. To have 35 state dinners in the space of 4 years was part of a deliberate outreach to the Washington community that enjoyed them so much, as well as to the international sphere. So her facilitation of the administration occurred both internationally and domestically, and it occurred traditionally as well as through the more for First Ladies, the more innovative areas of advanced public policy making.
And the Easter egg roll, which is
Easter
coming
egg
up,
roll.
and that's a very important role for the First Lady. My humor was not appreciated there. Your question.
I think one of the Carter's strengths has been their commitment to the hometown. Plains, Georgia has benefited so much from their presence there and their continued investment in the community. And it has been evolving, and it seems as though they always know the right next trick to grow the economy. And the most recent one, which was written up on in the New York Times a few days ago the development of solar panels to be able to power half of Plains, Georgia, from their own pecan farm. So I guess my question is, what is next? He seems to always be leading the way in terms of rural southern Georgia, and it's a commitment he's made. Do you think he's having an impact, and what are his aspirations going forward for the next best commitment there?
Well, it is their home, not just their hometown, but their home. I mean, it's the only place that they've ever really called home, and I think that their roots and that has been discussed in a lot of contexts. I sort of drew an analogy to small villages in Africa where they work. Others have talked about their connection to that land, giving them a perspective on the Middle East peace process and the way in which Palestinians and Israelis and others sort of feel a connection to the physical space that's there. We had a great time with this 10-acre solar field that, to your point, can at maximum output generate all of Plains' required electricity. And I think one of the things that we talk about a lot in our family is, for all of the little towns in South Georgia that don't have a president, what's going to happen there? Plains is a national park. It is a place that will always be a museum, essentially. In fact, the Jimmy Carter National Historic Site that's there is the only national park in the country that preserves a Depression-era rural environment, which, if you think about the impact that era and those places had on our national ethos, is crazy, right? But the worry that we have in my family is that everybody in the world is going to have to go to Plains someday to see what it's like to live in a small town, because these towns are dying on the vine. And there's a lot that's going on. There's a lot of disconnection. There's a lack of connection from a financial standpoint, and in other ways to how do we grow economies, what makes sense, even in a bigger town like Hazelhurst, Georgia, where I was this last weekend, or Douglas, which I was just discussing earlier this morning. There's a real struggle there. And one way that you can plug into the new economy is with renewable energy, as we discussed this week and as was out there. But there are others, and really thinking hard about what those economies look like and what it is that we need to preserve, and the real value of those communities is something that my grandparents represent the best of in many ways, and it's something that I hope and that they hope will really sort of become a part of a discussion about them and their lives as the real value in many of those places. And again, this solar field was a great example of a way to think hard and to, create jobs in a place where folks don't normally think of building sort of innovative and new things. So, but it matters, and they're experts in that. And they're a great example of what happens when you give good education to people in small towns.
Yes. We've got a mic for you here. There you go.
Thanks. I have a question that kind of relates to that in the sense that I'm from a small town in Georgia myself, and one of the concerns that Greensboro, and one of the concerns that I have is about the quality of health care and the availability and access to medicine, period. And I just wondered if they have some, with their concerns about health generally, if they have some concerns about what is happening to the rural health system in Georgia.
Did you address that to anyone in particular?
Anybody, but I was looking at Jason since he had a personal connection down there. But
Andy may have some thoughts too on that.
Yeah.
And if someone else would like to take it, I'll just say, and maybe Mary Ann can talk a little bit about the Carter Center, but my grandmother's passion for mental health parity, et cetera, has gotten her to a place now where they're really spending a lot of time about where you get services, right? And that's true from a community-based care standpoint, even in places like Atlanta, but particularly Greene County, for example, or you go a little bit farther to Hancock County, they're closing emergency rooms. If you have a heart attack in Hancock County now, 80% of those people die because you can't get to an emergency room. It's 45 minutes away by car, and you got to have a car. And so the inequality of sort of the dispersion of healthcare is something that's really important. And of course, my great-grandmother, Miss Lillian, to John's point earlier, she was a nurse. I mean, so that they grew up. My grandfather was the first president ever born in a hospital because they plugged into this rural healthcare system And so, again, you know, their life story is a story about the value of ensuring health care in those places. And so as we talk about them and their legacy, it's certainly one of them, and whoever else would like to add to that can do that. But
oh, I have a mic. I would just add that for President and Mrs. Carter, health is a human right. The access to health care is a human right. And I know that as they struggle to improve health for people, neglected people at the end of the road in Africa, they certainly feel the same way about people in Georgia and about, you know, the declining, actually, metrics all over this country for various reasons in terms of infant mortality and other indicators that, frankly, have fallen to levels that should embarrass the world's largest economy.
The Carter presidency, Andy, was a human rights presidency. That's the first time you really heard that term, as I recall.
It was, and we always talked about civil rights, but I think he was the first one to appoint an office of human rights. Young lady from, well, it was Harding Carter's wife, I forget. We had actually an office of human rights that not only provided and for advance of human rights in this country, but he introduced it abroad. And the whole, you know, opening of dialogue with South Africa was basically in response to human rights. And it was shocking when told to go ask African leaders. I also went to the Afrikaners and got P.W. Botha to think about human rights in terms of his own human right. And what I found was very interesting, very similar to what we found here, was that he really felt that there was going to be a bloodbath. In fact, one of the questions he asked me was, how long do we have before the bloodbath? And I said, you won't have one. He said, how can you say that? I said, because you don't know Nelson Mandela. You don't know Desmond Tutu. They were educated by the same kinds of missionaries that educated Martin Luther King. Remember that Gandhi started in South Africa also, and he went back to India and transformed India without killing anybody. And so it started a dialogue with people about things that we didn't used to talk about.
Would you say that you had to pressure President Carter on human rights, or was it the other way around?
In fact, he pressured me. I didn't want to leave the Congress. And Coretta King said, look, Stevenson couldn't stay at the UN but 2 years with Kennedy. How long do you think they'll let you stay in the UN? And I said, well, I'll stay longer than Stevenson. But he pressured me to, I said, no, I'd rather wait and come in your second term. He said, no, there may not be a second term. Whatever we're going to do, we have to do now.
Really?
And so I left the Congress, but the way I have learned to understand that one little phrase, and I'm sorry I didn't keep it because it was in his own handwriting, but to ask leaders what they expect of us. I call that the politics of respect. And I think that he did that with the Russians, with the Chinese, and he always encouraged people to talk. And it was very difficult because that was not the State Department's policy. And I find myself almost identifying with the confusion going on now, and I don't want to identify too much, but we were really rejected for telling the truth. And that was one of the things he said, you know, you don't lie. And so somebody asked me, well, Dan Rather, first week, what do you think about the Cubans in Africa? And I said, I think they've been a stabilizing force. Well, that was the wrong answer.
I think I read that in a headline somewhere.
Yeah, it was a headline. But I knew that the Cubans were there protecting Gulf oil, and in Angola, they never missed a day pumping oil because the Cubans were there protecting them from rebels in Congo that we were supporting. It didn't make sense, but it was the truth. And I think that that was the basis of human rights, was that you tell the truth and let the chips fall where they may. Now that was always a problem for him, and I'll tell this story and then shut up, because Abner Mikva said that Jimmy Carter was the only president he'd ever heard of that seemed to have read every bill. And when the tax committee went to take the tax code there, said it was about 10 inches thick. And when they went in to talk with the president about the tax code, he had little yellow notes all the way through it, and they said, golly. He said it intimidated the hell out of them because none of them had read it. And he said that was a strength and weakness because he intimidated people, and I never went into a briefing on anything where he didn't know more than I did about things that I'd been working with all my life. And so you see that, though, in the number of books that he's produced, and you see that in his still hours before daylight, that waking up and doing a wide variety of things. And I think that's sort of the secret of their life. Well, when I went to lunch at the White House, the only one time, I was served one glass of unsweetened iced tea, 1/2 of tuna fish sandwich with no mayonnaise, and 1 slice of lettuce with 1 piece of pineapple. And I was expecting a big fancy lunch. And I said, they eat right. You know, and I think that's the reason you see them so healthy at the age they are. It's always intimidating to me to be around him and feel so inadequate and undisciplined and downright sorry. He puts you on a guilt trip just by listening to him.
That, sir, is an amazing statement. I'm going to remember that. We've got time for maybe one more question. I'll go back to the back of the room, and there's a mic there for you. Yes.
Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity because I'm a Georgia Tech student. So my question is for Mr. Jason Carter. I think Mr. Reckford mentioned a lot about how Mr. and Mrs. Carter showed integrity day by day, and also about their love, how it's so enduring, even though they've been married for more than 70 years. And I find that almost impossible to think about how people could be so enduring. And my question is, have you noticed anything, any habits or something that they practice every day that really roots them in that integrity and love?
I think there's sort of 2 things that are remarkable to me. I think one is their faith. And Mr. Reckford, the folks in Habitat see that every day. Marianne sees it every day. Their faith really grounds them. And so much damage has been done to the public face of Christianity over the course of its politicization over the last, say, 25 years, my opinion. But they have this true and abiding belief that if they do right by other people, that it will bring them closer to God. And they share that together in a way that is very real and that manifests itself in their life every day. And as perhaps as a part of that, they keep it simple. I mean, the story that Ambassador Young told about the tuna fish sandwich, I mean, if you go to Plains on a Saturday, any Saturday, they will have for lunch the same lunch that they've had every day for 70 years, which is hot dogs with slaw on the top and a Bloody Mary. And that's what they eat. And one time, we sat. My wife and I we were flying every year. The family goes to on a trip that they take us on. There were 39 Carter family members on this trip this year. which is, grandchildren and grandchildren's spouses, and then great-grandchildren, and, a huge number of people. But a couple of years ago, we were on a flight, just on a regular Delta flight from Atlanta. I think we were going to Nicaragua. And my grandmother, the flight gets up. This goes along with your story about him mowing the lawn, right? My grandmother reaches into her purse, and she takes out this Tupperware with this pimento cheese in it, and this loaf of, white Wonder Bread or whatever it was, and a plastic knife. And she starts asking people if they want a pimento cheese sandwich. And they're sitting in coach in a Delta flight, and the people next to them, they'd already gotten up and said hello and shaken everybody's hand, but they're thinking like, this is the former president of the United States and the First Lady, and she's sitting here with a plastic knife spreading pimento cheese on some white bread because that's what they were going to eat. And, she wasn't going to eat very much because it's pimento cheese, but, the point is they've stayed who they were. And, I'm a lawyer, right? I've seen lawyers have big success and change who they are. You've seen people who get a job like being the head of Habitat for Humanity in Atlanta and change who they are. You haven't done that, Lisa. I'm just saying. My only point, Lisa, is that you have an impressive job, right? And it's the kind of thing that for some people it changes who they are. But my grandparents went and did what they did and never changed. And they live in the same house, they do the same things every day, they appreciate those simple things, and they just never got ahead of themselves. And how they've done that together really, I think, is what has kept them together.
Thank you, Jason. I think we need to draw this to a close. I don't know about you, but I've enjoyed this immensely. This has been terrific. So Jason, Marianne, Jonathan, Lisa, Andy, thank you for being here and shedding some real interesting light on the Carters and their many, many contributions and their humanity. And thank you all for being here. Lunch is next.